Okay, welcome everybody. Was that too loud? Welcome everybody to the final presidential event here. My name is Joanne Belknap. Soon I will not be the president of the American Society of Criminology, and we'll be passing it off to Candace Kretschnit. There's so many wonderful things about being president, and one of them is getting to pick a American Society of Criminology Justice Award recipient. And as soon as I found out I got to do that, I knew who I wanted to pick, and it's Latifah Simon, who is right here. I know a lot of you saw Latifah yesterday with this organization she has done with the executive director of the Center for Young Women's Development, and just amazing work with girls and getting them on their feet and helping them learn how to get on their feet, and they're doing amazing things. And Lexi Levin, who made the film, this was a very young woman experience. If you didn't see the film and haven't, Girl Trouble, it's remarkable. And we have all these things that we feel like don't work in the system that we're trying to, and oh my gosh, this organization works. Latifah has gone on to be a MacArthur Fellow. She has been the executive director of the Lawyers Community for Civil Rights, and she is now working as the director of the Rosenberg Foundation and California's Future Initiative, doing a huge amount of work on reentry, and I just couldn't be happier and prouder to have her be the 2014 American Society of Criminology Justice Award recipient. Thank you for everything you do, Latifah.
Right? So for your whole life to want to free the girls and to be able to stand in front of all of you all with just such admiration and love for the work that you're doing to develop a pedagogy of freedom. I grew up in this city, born and raised, and I started working at the nonprofit organization that you just talked about when I was 19 years old. And it was a cadre of young women and girls from the streets, and we learned how to develop a multi-million-dollar organization to guide ourselves to freedom. We should have named our organization the Young Harriets. It is possible with young people at the center, regardless of the trauma and drama. We know that poverty and racism, they're the pathologies. They're the pathologists, not our young people. And so in defining and developing an organization that was based on hood spirit in sociology, in academia, in resilience, we decreased recidivism by 3,000 girls that we worked with in the 10 years that I was there by 90%. 90%. The organization is 20 years old and their record is solid. Why? Because we employed women to heal at twice the minimum wage. Let's invest in economic justice opportunities to get folks out of poverty. This right here encourages me to continue to dig deeper, because freedom is a revolutionary act. It's a revolutionary act. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work that you are doing. And there, honestly, what Brian said today was so real. And whoever missed that presentation missed out on a religious experience. He said, we do the work. I do the work because I am broken, and it makes me whole. Let us do the work in acknowledgement that our system is broken and we can heal it. We can heal it, and that is the religious experience of criminology. Thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Hillary Potter. I'm an associate professor at the University of Colorado Boulder in the Department of Ethnic Studies, previously in the Department of Sociology. I'm here to introduce Joanne Belknap, president of the American Society of Criminology, a huge feat. Troublemaker, loudmouth, inconvenient, only a few words that have been used to describe Joanne Belknap. But these are descriptions from those who have failed to recognize that her research, her teaching, her activism are all based in justice and equality for all, especially for students and for victims of crime and oppression. Joanne Belknap has spent an academic career, if not her entire life, advocating for justice for the invisible, the disparaged, and those thrown away in the bowels of an often unjust criminal justice system. She exemplifies what we should all do as criminologists by making sure that her research is fed back to the communities and the entities to work toward a just criminal justice system and a just world. Brave, bold, dedicated, resilient, wicked smart, fierce, passionate, compassionate. These are the words that describe Joanne Belknap. Please welcome my advisor, my mentor, my colleague, my publicist, my other mother, my homie for life, my dear friend, Joanne Belknap.
Hillary Potter, you can see why I call her my sister from a better mother. And I do love her mother. I wish I could take that credit. She is amazing. In case you don't know, and I haven't read it yet, I'm looking very forward to read her book, Intersectionality and Criminology, Disrupting and Revolutionizing Studies of Crime. It's due out in April. I'm sure everybody else is equally excited for this book to come out. Hillary is not only one of the smartest people I've known, but she also has the unparalleled courage and integrity. Thank you, Hillary. I have to do a shout out to my family. This is Scott Summers, my partner of over 20 years, and our son, Casey Belknap Summers, who's a junior at Ohio State. And this was during an OSU football scrimmage last April. I have to do this shout out because they have been remarkably supportive of my activism and career. The first few months that Scott and I were together, two of the things that happened were, first, he helped me drive an abused woman, a woman escaping her abuser halfway across Ohio at night, a 6-hour journey. Also, those first few months, the late Little Rock Reed, who many of you know, was then recently out of prison and staying at my house. Scott and I had gone away for a weekend in Scott's car, and when we got back, my car was wrecked and Little Rock was gone. And his extradition case later went to the U.S. Supreme Court, which many of you might know about. Luckily, Scott thought my wrecked car was as funny as I did. Or as he says to his friends and family, life with Joe. I'm pretty much always keyed up about some cause, and at the same time, and continuously losing my keys and wallet, as my ASC roommate Helen Eigenberg will attest to, and says at the end of every conference, that man is a saint. And he is. Casey, our son, has been a champ since he was an infant. He has gone to all sorts of protests, grassroots organizing for incarcerated women, and all sorts of other things, and I just couldn't ask for people that supported my activism more than they do, so I'm just really, really grateful. Who are those masked Spidey women? That's Susan Case and Joanne Belknap at the mid-year board meeting last year. I just had to put this in here. Getting to know and work with Susan Case, and I'm sure almost everybody must know her name, is the most incredibly dedicated person to ASC, and she is absolutely hilarious and has an amazing sense of justice as well. And Susan, I know you're not going to miss me missing your emails or misunderstanding them, but I am really going to miss working with you, and I just want to thank you so very much. Chris heard when that I did a slide on him, and he told me not to do it, but I just felt like I had to. One of the main things about Chris, I feel like his dedication to ASC, again, is just so incredible, but his global outreach has really changed this organization. And while he's been a leader in so many ways, I heard that we have over 50 countries represented this year, which I feel so great about, and a lot of that is due to Chris not only going to other countries, but really welcoming people here, and I hope we can just keep building on that, and so pleased with all the international representation here. I always said, too, when I don't know if most people know this about him, but he helped link one of the rape and murder victims of Ted Bundy's to Ted Bundy, and I just kept saying to him, before they found Osama bin Laden, I don't know why they don't put you on that case. I know you'd find him. Wayne Osgood, don't flip out. I'm not putting this part in my written speech that I'm submitting to criminology. And so that everybody knows there's not favoritism in the Journal of Criminology, I had 2 articles rejected this year. I'm 2 for 2. And I'm just hoping this speech is not going to be rejected. And I love Wayne. I am so honored to be elected to this, and we really switched up the program this year, and Bonnie Vasey and Bob Apel, Nancy Winters in particular, just really helped with reframing this. I hope you really liked it. I'm really proud of how we did this, and I just think it spoke to a different way that we need to start looking at this. I want to thank all my current and former students, which are probably half the people in this room. That's how many wonderful students I've had, and I'm so fortunate to have worked with all of you. Mona Danner and Helen Eigenberg and Nancy Winters, we met as graduate students decades ago and have just been sisters to me. All of you who've served on things that I've asked you to or didn't ask you to make this conference go so well, did such a great job on awards and everything else, really grateful. I also, in the spirit of activism, want the 2 main nonprofits that I am on the board on, and one is Focus Reentry, which is a jail reentry program that's been incredibly successful, yet we're always fighting for funding, and our local Rape Crisis Center that also does a lot on education, so I just want to do a shout out to them too. As I said, I'm really honored to have been elected the president of ASC. When I was nominated and after I won, a number of people told me that they were really pleased that an activist had been nominated and an activist had won. And this, because being an activist is key to my being, I wanted to make that what my speech was about. Clearly, that is why I chose Latifah Simon for the ASC Justice Award and Brian Stevenson as the presidential plenary speaker. I know all of you who had a chance to hear them are different for that experience. Both of those I just feel so fortunate that we had that. Now to transfer into this, there is just something terribly wrong when we incarcerate at a higher rate than anywhere in the world, all funded by the government, but we have to struggle to fund schools and health care, and to open and maintain jail and prison reentry programs, women's shelters, child sexual abuse organizations, rape crisis centers, and so on. Research has clearly established how access to decent education, health care, and other forms of social services are key to success. Research has also verified the pathways between victimization and offending and victimization. Yet our so-called correctional system does little to rehabilitate anyone, only incarcerate them and further marginalize them upon their release. If criminologists aren't willing to do something about all of these connections between social and legal justice, then we are falling down on the job. A significant component of activism is broadening the diversity of criminologists to provide a lens that more accurately reflects what we study. I titled the theme for this year, Criminology at the Intersections of Oppression. Clearly, race, class, gender, sexuality, and other personal identifiers and demographics are vitally important in so many aspects of everyday life all over the world. It's difficult to imagine a field where it's more necessary than criminology to have a diverse and inclusive representation of scholars and approaches, and intersectional approaches. Research designs to study victims and victimization, offenders and offending, prisons, jails, police, courts, the criminal legal system decision-making and sanctioning, and basic human rights are tightly bound with intersections of oppression. And we have just got to do a better job at broadening not only what we study, but who is in the academy. I know from many of my acquaintances and good friends I've made at the ASC over the years that a lot of us, especially the women and people of color or people of color, we pursued our advanced degrees in criminology or related fields because of our own victimizations and or, for many of us, our own actual offending or being wrongfully labeled as offenders. The victimizations can range from personal, such as intimate partner abuse and sexual abuse, to state sanctions such as racial profiling. And whether we were or weren't victimized personally and or by the criminal legal system, personnel, or laws, many of us in this room pursued our doctorates because we have a strong passion for justice. The Academy as a whole lauds research, particularly large externally funded grants and publishing in top-tier journals, as far more important than teaching or service. In turn, the Academy typically rewards teaching far more than service, unless the service is to the scholars department, university, college, or research institution, or larger academy, such as the ASC. And not that these aren't important, but hopefully going beyond this. So even most of us who pursued a doctorate become criminologists because we wanted to change laws, policies, practices, and opportunities. We're literally indoctrinated from our first semesters in graduate school, stressing the importance of research and publishing over teaching and research. I argue that too often we have lost our ways in staying close to our dreams to advocate for social and legal justice. Perhaps we tell ourselves, I will play the game until I get my PhD, and then I will start volunteering, do advocacy, and so on when I find a good academic job. But then it turns into, I will be an activist when I get tenure. And for some of us, this turns into, once I retire, I will volunteer for social and legal justice. Given the statistics we know from Brian Stevenson that he verified today, criminologists cannot afford to lose our way and abandon activism. As he stated, we wouldn't stand up for 1 in 10 planes crashing. The FAA would stop flying and we wouldn't be boarding the planes. How is it then that for every 10 prisoners executed in the United States, 1 is found to be a wrongful conviction? How can we be so complacent when 1 in 3 African American boys will end up in prison or jail, and 1 in 6 Latina boys? Looking at the grasping what activism can do in the ranges, I really like this quote from Martin and Vasey in their book, Nonviolent Speaks. It is important to acknowledge I'm going to read it from here, that resistance to aggression, repression, and oppression occurs all the time in all sorts of ways, large and small, even in situations of severe oppression, such as slavery or Nazi death camps. There are expressions and acts of autonomy and defiance and insubordination. Subtle uses of language and gestures can express resistance, as can religious ceremonies, songs, styles of work, and a host of other aspects of everyday life. They go on to say, resistance is possible and routinely occurs in every conceivable circumstance. Nevertheless, because there is no guarantee that the momentum will build, we need to reflect on how, when, and under what circumstances these everyday resistances give rise to larger, more capable challenges. We need to face the hard reality of sometimes misplaced efforts in somewhat futile actions and to ask what could have occurred but didn't, or could be occurring but isn't. Ayers views social movement participants as outsiders and states that social movements are sustained interactions between those with power and those without it. I argue that although faculty aren't situated in, quote, established political institutions, we aren't exactly outsiders to institutions, and many of us not only collect healthy salaries and benefits, but tenure provides us with remarkable job security and flexibility, which is rarely found in any other kind of work. Therefore, I contend that criminologists have a heightened responsibility for activism, informed by the knowledge we've been fortunate enough to learn in our educational aspirations, and particularly to use the knowledge that we found in our own work. I reread parts of Greens and Gabaldon's 2000 book, African American Criminological Thought, after choosing a title for this presidential speech, but I note it here because I think my term criminal activist has the same meaning as what they called activist scholars. In this book, which hopefully all of you have read, they profile so many things, but especially so many of the African American scholars that most of us never learned about in graduate school and since, and the incredible information that they brought forth, and activism. I made this slide just, I was trying, at the time I was trying to look at what I'm calling one kind of research activism in my speech that will be in criminology, but to look at some of what I think are some of the most important books that have been published in the recent years. And all of these are by people of color, and when we widen that lens, what we get. Another part of the research activism that I talk about is people that, while they're collecting data, are actually advocating for some of the people that are in their study, which is what most of the authors of these books do. Let's see. I attribute my own activism to witnessing and experiencing injustice growing up, and to the influencing example of my older sister, who's a couple of years older, Sandra Dangler, and the many activists I witnessed on television, news, documentaries, and whom I read. Even as a child and youth in Colorado and Kentucky, my sister was a remarkable role model for standing up against everyday acts of racism, whether it was perpetrated by our family members or perfect strangers. In the summer of 1980, when I was an undergraduate at the University of Colorado, and she was in the Peace Corps in Guatemala as a nurse, she wrote me a letter and said, "You have to read these two books, and in this order, Malcolm X and Angela Davis' autobiographies." I did, and they were transformative. As I became a more focused activist during my undergraduate degree and while I dropped out of college, I was intrigued with socialism and Marxism, and even took a class my last year in England on Marxism and Leninism. I was thrilled with the praxis aspect of Marxism that called for scholars to do more than sit in their ivory towers. I wasn't a scholar then. And although I still embrace most of the tenets of socialism, Marxism, the new criminology, and all the other names, critical criminology, sometimes I agree with some of other feminists and race scholars that even in this, I'm dismayed by the lack of addressing some of the intersections of oppression, particularly when these aren't even noted in the articles or books. In 1982, Eileen Leonard criticized the new criminology for being overly simplified and generalized, and between 1976 and 1996, many feminist scholars criticized the new criminologists and legal scholars for ignoring women. In 1996, Professor Nafeen from Australia wrote how the new criminologists ignored female offenders and overlooked the common crimes of domestic violence and rape. And in her excellent 1987 book, Female Crime, The Construction of Women in Criminology, she only mentioned the Marxist perspective in a footnote due to their almost non-existent accounting of women's and girls offending. Indeed, the footnote stated, "A Marxist approach is not included in this volume for the simple reason that the left has shown little specific interest in the female offender." At the end of my second year as an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati in 1988, when Jesse Jackson was running for president and coming to Cincinnati, racist posters about him were glued on African American students' doors in most or all of the dorms on campus. At a campus-wide faculty meeting shortly thereafter, a white professor moved that this was freedom of speech and that the student organizations and individual students who posted them shouldn't be punished. The faculty who voted did so unanimously to support this as freedom of speech. I was a coward, and I looked to the two African American faculty members I was sitting with to stand up to vote against it. None of us did. I've never been so ashamed of myself. I didn't use my white privilege to stand up, but waited for someone else, including two of the handful of African American professors at the university with whom I just eaten lunch and was now sitting with. Since then, I decided I needed to stand up for what I believed is right and not wait for other people to make the first move, particularly when I come from a place of power due to my race, class, and certainly as a tenured faculty member. Last week, I had the deep privilege to hear Carlotta Walls Lanier, who was the youngest of the Little Rock 9 school children. She was 14 years old when Central High School was integrated in 1957. In this picture on the far left, you can see Carlotta being kept from entering high school by a National Guardsman. Her father was a World War II vet and a brick mason, and her mother a secretary in the public housing office. I did not know until she spoke that her house was bombed by racists her senior year of high school, and they kept her father in custody for 72 hours, as if he would have bombed his own family. When that didn't work, they took one of her friends born 15 minutes apart from her, also a teenager, charged and convicted him, and he went to prison, wrongful conviction, for bombing her house. Her book is just amazing, A Mighty Long Way, and I really encourage people to have her come and speak too. She is an incredible speaker, and the book is really great. But part of this for me was the ongoing criminalization that happened that I had no idea about. In December 2013, less than a year ago, I was writing a letter of recommendation to my own colleagues for a former undergraduate student who subsequently graduated from law school and was then the victim of what I very strongly feel is a wrongful conviction. Her now ex-husband had killed their infant son. She was sentenced more harshly for not knowing he was going to kill their baby than he was sentenced for killing the baby. Many of you helped me with this lost cause, as it sadly feels like sometimes. She served over 5 years in prison and has been on supervised parole since. While writing the letter for my department and advocating for acceptance, I started realizing I couldn't find any convict criminologists who weren't white men. And so in the process of this, I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, Angela Davis certainly qualifies as a convict criminologist, and what an amazing record she has. I also, Douglas Tompkins, he was incarcerated from 1977 to 1995, and in one of his publications in 2005 with one of his students, Jay Coe, he says, I provide my background as a prison gang member to give readers a sense of what it is that I am speaking to you. Normally, as a trained social scientist, I would not allow myself to speak in the first person, and I would be reluctant to use anecdotal data to support a position. However, here I believe that my experience as a leader of a major gang operating within the prison community provide me with the opportunity to add to the discussion about gangs and the management of gang activity in prisons. I found that just a very powerful statement. Also, I started thinking about when I was thinking I could only find white men who were convict criminologists, that in addition to the two of them, Kathy Boudin served 22 years in prison for her role in driving a getaway car in the 1981 Brinks robbery by the Weather Underground, and that left 2 police officers and a security guard dead. Notably, after her conviction, 2 other former Weather Underground members, Bill Ayers and Bernadette Dorn, in the news not too long ago, adopted Boudin's then infant son, Chisa, who has recently published an article on the children of incarcerated parents in the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology. I didn't know any of this till I started researching all this, although I had cited Boudin before. This picture here is Chisa, and in the caption I found on the web, it said, with his 2 mothers, which I just love this statement. So Kathy Boudin did get a PhD after her long incarceration, and is an assistant professor at the School of Social Work at Columbia University. So we do have convict criminologists other than white men. We need to have more convict criminologists. We need to be able to have an academy that says people do this and have learned that they could give some insights into this field, as well as victims. And I've certainly heard of cases of victims who were told they shouldn't research rape because they were victims and would be biased, and the same thing about this. Why do we think that people wouldn't be biased who didn't have these experiences? But that is part of what the point I'm trying to make. In the article that I'm submitting to Criminology, I go into far more detail about the overlapping ways that activist criminology can take place in our service teaching and research. Today, Brian Stevenson identified 4 critical components for successful efforts to work towards social and legal justice. For those of you who were there, he talked about proximity to what we study. If we're going to study prisoners, we need to be meeting some prisoners. If we are going to study, and I would just add, as victims, we need to study victims. We need to not just be crunching numbers all the time. We have a responsibility to make it far more real and proximal, and I love this point, and go from large to small. And he also talked about our narratives and how dangerous some of the narratives from criminologists have been in what has happened with our mass incarceration. And he says, when our narratives are driven by fear and anger, we are not going to get justice. And so how we can make those narratives in a way that deal with social injustice, criminal legal injustice, and how we can actually make change. When I read Ms. Lanier's and Dr. Angela Davis and Dr. Douglas Tompkins' work, I really wonder why so many faculty, including me, are sometimes too cowardly to stand up for justice. I see this speech as a call to action. I hope that you feel inspired by it and continue or step up your advocacy for the legal and social justice in some of the many areas it's possible to do this. And so I see this as a call to action. I hope it is heeded, and thank you so much for the honor of serving as the president of the American Society of Criminology this year. Thank you. Thank you so much. So heartwarming. Thank you. Thank you. It's really a great experience, and thank you so much. And it's now my distinct pleasure to welcome the next president, Candace Crutchnet. And to pass her this gavel, she's going to speak for a few minutes, and then she will close out the meeting. Thank you again.
Not really for a few minutes. I'm just going to say we're working very hard to make Washington, D.C. a great experience, so I hope to see you all there. And thank you, Joanne, for a good meeting in San Francisco. And now let's all go have a glass of wine.